Welcome to the Open Photo Project, the podcast. The Open Photo Project uses photography, audio, and text to present the beautiful, complex lives of consensually non-monogamous people. On this podcast, you will hear the words of people who are in many kinds of relationships under the umbrella of consensual non-monogamy, from polyamory, relationship anarchy, open relationships, solo poly, and more. I'm Erica Capin. I have been photographing and interviewing people for the Open Photo Project since 2015. If you would like to see the photos of people who are in these interviews, you can find them on the openphotoproject.com or all across social media. Many of these interviews were recorded on location, so if you hear a creak or children or a noisy cafe in the background, I hope you can enjoy the ambiance as well as the words and ideas. And please consider supporting this project on Patreon. Becoming a monthly supporter at any level means that you will have access to the full interview downloads, rather than these question excerpts. If you would like to become a supporter, just go to patreon.com. Thank you for listening to the Open Photo Project. So here we are with Rue and Andy and Cal and Ida. Okay, and Laddie. So the first question, just to kind of get started, is if you could share your name and your place of residence and your, like, what you do in the world, your occupation or whatever in that category that you would like to share.
I can start. I'm Rue. I live here at the Rêve and spent some time in the city, in New York City, and I do tech support for nonprofits. It's part of a work-owned cooperative based in the city.
I'm Andy. I'm a little hoarse, rather. I also live here, under this dog. And I work in queer and non-traditional family law. Part-time private practice, part-time direct services at a nonprofit, and I also am the president of the National Lawyers Guild.
I'm Cal. I live full-time at the Rêve. I do not commute. I just live here, work here, and I work in the solar industry as outreach and education and community building type of person.
Rock and roll. I'm Ida. I reside in Boston, but my heart lives here partly. And I work as a therapist, but I also do consulting and speaking events and things like that around sexual health, alternative justice systems, and just a lot of things about how to make the world a neater place to live in. Neater as in nicer, not as in organized, but sometimes organized too.
Nice. Cool. Thank you. That's so cool. I didn't know about the solar thing.
Oh yeah, right. Let's talk about it later.
Yeah. Okay, so what terminology do you like to use when you talk about your relationships? That could be about your relationship identity or style, or the terms that you use for each other or for your other partners, or any kind of terminology that feels good to you.
We can start with me again. I can go around. Generally, I often interchangeably use polyamorous and non-monogamous. I know there are plenty of nuances to using both, but I use both to describe this sort of not being monogamous as the general schema, and I often use the term, I'll use the term polycule to indicate that sort of we have our group of there are different configurations of groups of people that are in relationships together. So this is, four of us is, to me, it feels like one polycule, one configuration of all of our relationships. This is one configuration of them that operates as that does things together in this group. But this is part of a larger polycule that is all going to be here this weekend. I use the term partner often for people I'm with, but Andy is specifically my boy, and I'm his captain. And that's definitely identify as queer and operate absolutely within queerness as the identity of myself and the people who I'm with.
Thank you.
I usually just use family, I think. Like I say, for individuals, I sometimes say sweetie, because I feel like it's non-specific enough to be broadly applicable, while also being twee, which are my two.
Twee.
Twee.
T-W-E-E.
Like indie rock sometimes. When they're like strum, 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 and they got like the very soft voice, that's twee. Yeah.
Or all of the city of Denver, that's twee.
I don't know if that's
so
true.
confused
right
right
now.
now.
Sorry, twee is just an adjective that was used a lot in music reviews in like 2011. It's just like it's very like
There's like a cute.
I said indie rock. What I mean is like indie film soundtrack.
Okay.
You know what?
Yeah.
Is that helping at all?
Yes, that helps. Thank
Yeah.
you.
That's a twee. Twee is like, yeah, it's often used as an adjective for music.
Okay.
That's kind of well. Okay, bye, dog.
I don't know. If
He's
he
got
can get
places
down
to
those
go.
stairs by himself.
If he needs help, we'll go help him. Or he can deal.
So you use twee to talk about your
No,
family, or that was just a
no. I use the word sweeties to
Uh-huh.
talk about people that I'm in one kind or another relationship with.
Mhm.
And I like the word sweeties because it is both fairly non-specific and twee.
I am okay. Thank you. Understood.
Yeah, I have a struggle with the term relationship anarchy because it accurately describes how I do what I do, and also I find it an obnoxious word, and so I don't like to use it because it makes me feel obnoxious. But also, the definition of it does accurately describe my setup.
Mm-hmm.
So I just end up saying that exact sentence pretty often.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right, pacing the floors there, laddie.
He's just providing percussion.
Yeah.
So you need some drums with this?
Oh my god.
ASMR.
Right. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah. Words.
Right. So, I am very situationally. I use words very situationally, so it'll be like, sometimes I'll say my, sweetie, partner, sometimes roommate, friend, like, in the, like, boyfriend or girlfriend sometimes, depending on, like, whether that's a term that the person likes, any of those, depending on the circumstances. I don't usually use poly-specific language in my own talk about relationships. Like, I rarely refer to being in a polycule or, having, like, anything like that. I don't usually use those terms. I don't usually describe myself as, like, being polyamorous or, like, that as, like, an adjective for myself. It's more of, like, maybe an adjective for a relationship that I'm in, but it's not really an adjective about me or, like, an inherent thing that I feel like is a part of me. So I think I've used the term, like, open relationship or non-exclusive or non-monogamous as, like, an explanation if people are ever, like, confused and they're like, we don't understand. But in general, I'm more inclined to say, yeah, no, I'm dating more than one person, or, I have two sweeties, or, things like that. Like, I usually talk more in those kind of terms. And the idea of saying like sweeties is usually because it's non-gendered. And that's the more important thing, I think, than like, just so you know that it's plural. I think because I don't work in queer spaces almost ever, I do a lot of like mental math about like what kind of information is acceptable to share and what's not. So I think I do a lot, like I'm a lot more confusing to talk to, I think, because someone will be like, wait, I thought your partner was Jewish, but now you're saying that they're Puerto Rican. And I'm like, they're two different people. And they're like, what? And so like, I don't give all the backstory up front. It just sometimes comes out. But yeah, I would say that the way that I talk about relationships and stuff is like very, very situationally different, just depending on what I'm doing and where I am.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
I want to be like, ditto to this part of this person's thing.
No, use your own words.
Not allowed. No, so I mean, I guess similarly to Rue, for example, like the terms that I mostly would use are non-monogamous or polyamorous. Partly because a lot of my work depends on people finding me and making space for whether it's therapy or, you know, any kind of education that people are looking for those terms around. And so if I'm using them pretty openly, that helps people get to me, which is part of the goal, right? So for me, the question, kind of like what Cal was talking about, is situational, right? What is the goal of me communicating in this moment? What am I trying to get at? One thing that's really important to me generally is when describing my relationships is talking to the people and saying, how do you want me to talk about you? And that often is the conversation I will have. I'll be like, so I have to talk to people about you. What do you want me to say? And like, what term would feel good? Especially, you know, when dating as queer people, trans people, that becomes a question of safety. That becomes a question of, you know, bodily autonomy and all that stuff. So I usually have those conversations. I use partner. I also use sweetie. Sweetie is one that I usually use if there's like a romantic involvement component there. Partner is generally a more non-specific word for me. And so if I haven't talked to someone about what word we'll use, but we definitely have a thing going, partner is usually the one that I go to. Because it could be like business partners, sexy partners, like
Crime
what?
partners.
Crime partners. What is it? We're being gay and doing crime. Right. And so it's broad and I like that. And similar to Andy. Right.
My romantic colleague.
Yo, romantic colleagues.
That's
yes.
I know where we're
Yes. I've never used that term, but now I want to.
Done.
Perfect.
Done.
Update our Fed life.
Romantic colleague.
Yeah.
Romantic. I mean, it's a new name for metamor.
That's true. You know what?
Yeah.
Get out. It's correct. And let me see what else about terms. Yum. Oh, it's similar to Andy. The relationship anarchy piece feels really relevant in terms of politics, but that is not a community that I am generally trying to ensure finds me. And so I don't usually, that sounded way more, that sounded mean maybe, but like in a very non-mean way, or it's just, that's not a community that I am like, I want to make sure you find me for my services, because usually they're using other words anyway. But as far as like politics, yeah, like a lot of it is non-hierarchical, and so that's also something I like to use in terms of my language. So I don't generally use things like primary partner. I might use like a nesting partner for like, who am I currently living with? But that any term I found like just gets more complicated as time goes on, and relationships get more complicated, right? Because I live in Boston, I have a partner that I live with full time, but I also have the Rêve, and so like, what does that mean? And so, but non-hierarchical terms generally.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Open Photo Project.